1976, we deployed a total of 500 of these devices. Each device had a total destructive yield of 25 megatons. Megatons are the larger number that we're using to measure yield in this context. I'll give you a way to compare. The bomb that we dropped on Hiroshima was 12 kilotons. A 12 kiloton bomb in a flash and in an instant vaporized nearly 150,000 people by converting their molecular structure to plasma. Boop, you're just gone. 150,000 people, done. Pretty quick. Surprisingly low yield. A 25 megaton device, one 25 megaton device, has the total yield output of 2,083.33 single devices we dropped on Hiroshima. One bomb equivalent to 2,083 Hiroshimas, times 500. Wrap your head around that number for a moment. If we killed 150,000 people in one go with a 12 kiloton device, and if it worked out this way, and by the way, the physics on this clearly doesn't work out this way, this is just by way of explaining. Like you have a 1-to-1 ratio, right? That means that for each one of these devices, you are killing the equivalent of 150,000 people 2,083 times. I worked the numbers out, it's 156 trillion people is what we had the capacity to kill in one go between 1962 and 1976 with this device alone. That's a tremendous amount of power that we unlock. And we keep lying to ourselves and we keep lying to the public that you will survive, that a nuclear war is winnable, right? And the public buys this until what event? Anybody want to guess? The Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cuban Missile Crisis brings home the horror of the Cold War, the real reality, the real terror of what's happening when Khrushchev and the Soviets put medium-range continental ballistic missiles in Cuba, 75 miles off the coast of Florida, with a capacity to reach everywhere in the United States with the exception of Seattle, with 5 minutes warning. You killed basically the entire population of the United States in 5 minutes warning. And that single event, which happens over the course of several days in the middle of October, that event begins to shift Americans away from the idea that the war is winnable, that a nuclear exchange with the Soviet Union is something that we can survive. And imagine the anxiety and the pressures and the sudden realization you've got to protect your family from this unknown, invisible terror that belongs to somebody else. And you start digging these bomb shelters in your backyard. These things really happen. And that anxiety spills out into popular culture, as it always does. Our anxieties go to popular culture. Remember, at the same time that these anxieties associated with the Cold War, what are the best movies you can go see at the time? They're all the messed up movies involving zombies and the body snatchers and things that are these terrible, invisible, or like strange beings of another kind that are metaphors for the Soviet Union. I mean, Invasion of the Body Snatchers is just straight up an anti-communism movie. I don't care how you slice it. You're talking about converting Americans into these faceless automatons for an unknown, right? That's the whole Invasion of the Body Snatchers. It's a metaphor for this is what happens if you let communism win. A lot of times we placate these things with music, we placate them with movies and other entertainment and alcohol in the 1950s and the 1960s. But we've had enough drama this week. Let's just remember that the end goal here is a quality mixed cocktail and some groovy tunes. Right? That's the real goal. We discussed earlier the advent or the creation of the Hifi system. You know, before the Hifi system comes out, the idea of stereophonic sound in the home is a mystery. It's a non-existent thing. We can't do it yet. We're not doing stereo multi-tracking yet. where we can split instruments out left and right, or a little left and a little right, to give the impression to the ear that you're in front of the band. Sadly, the nature of this room is that we can't listen to this selection of music that I have in stereo. But the playlist that I made for this lecture, it's an Instagram, Spotify, some social thing, Spotify. I put the link for that on the Facebook link for this lecture. So you can go ahead and get it at home and listen to it. And listen to it on good headphones or a nice spread out system. Listen to that hi-fi thing. So these things are coming into the home. They're spending their discretionary money and they're buying albums. And they're buying this new technology, this hi-fi technology. They're listening in stereo for the first time. They're hearing left and right. This is a huge, huge deal. People spend crazy amounts of money. In fact, some of the songs and some of the styles were written specifically so that for the first time people could hear the cymbals on this side and the floor toms on this side, or whatever strange and unusual name or sound they chose to add to the music. And the reason I say strange and unusual is because there's basically 2 or 3 really strong types of music during the 1950s and 1960s that are associated with this kind of, again, Mad Men-like cocktail culture, right? So there's the ones that we all know and that are easy for us to remember because we all secretly love them and we should. And these are things like the Rat Pack, right? It's like Dean Martin and Sinatra and these guys crack jokes. And frankly, I can't believe they got away with some of the jokes that they got away with because they are borderline about 90% of the time. But they're charming and they're fun. Or you get Louis Prima and Keely Smith, the perfect comedy guy and straight gal. She's straight the whole time. She never cracks a smile. Her voice is like smooth, perfect glass. And he's an absolute goofball. It's no wonder they chose him to play the orangutan in the Disney version of Jungle Book. He kind of acted that way on stage. He was the perfect fit. These are the swingers and the lounge singers, right? You know them all. And you know the songs. You hear them all the time. But the other thing that's happening is this stranger subgenre of music. The Exotica by like Martin Denny, Les Baxter. These guys do these very unusual and very exotic sounding records that involve animal sounds and things that we've not heard before on typical records, strange noisemakers, stuff that's panned pretty far to the right and then moves across the stereo spectrum to the left, designed to take advantage of this new technology. Some of this music, I think, very unfairly gets categorized as muzak, like elevator music. It's not. It's kind of weird. It's kind of fun. And this particular brand of music, this particular genre of music, is picked up by Playboy magazine in a lot of ways. They're promoting this kind of strange, exotic, and what they begin to couch as bachelor-style music, right? So here's your guy in his thin black tie and his white press shirt and his Manhattan, listening to the new record on his, what was no doubt, very expensive new hi-fi. And this carries with it the idea of success, of the post-war success. It's embedded in the appetites associated with this kind of music. Of course, it all shifts pretty quickly as soon as Elvis shakes his hips. And these things start to fade. They've made a remarkable resurgence. There was a large resurgence of swing in the mid-90s, which I thought was a lot of fun. But we are hearing this now, and when I was putting the lecture together, was trying to think, who could I go to ask about this? Like, why are these things returning? I mean, we can speculate about some of the reasons that these things look attractive to us. Maybe because of the successes look similar. The economy is doing very well. Suddenly, people are spending a little bit more money than they had in the past. Not for the same reasons, but we are seeing a little bit more economic success. We are certainly probably experiencing some anxiety that would look very familiar to somebody growing up in the 1950s and the 1960s, particularly as it applies to the specter of nuclear war. That has been something that's been absent since, I would say, arguably the fall of the wall. And since the fall of the wall, 88, 89, 90, in that time period, to right now, we've been pretty willing to quickly forget the terror of nuclear war, right up until the part where we told North Korea, we'll go to war with you, and suddenly that specter has returned. The old ghost of a nuclear exchange with a faraway enemy is back, probably reviving some of those anxieties, perhaps making us look backwards to something that can help us relieve those anxieties, and it would make sense. So I reached out to this fine couple here. This is Kelly and Paul. Kelly and Paul have they have a blog, they have a Facebook page, and they call themselves the Velvetine Kitchen. And it's the Velvetine Lounge Kitchen. And kitchen is like kitsch-in. They are legitimately really funny. They know an unbelievable amount of information about vintage cocktail culture and food. So on a whim, I sent them a request and said, hey guys, I have some questions I would like answered because I don't have a good source for some of this information. Could you have a response? And I sent a video, which I thought was really, really industrious. So it's a short video, it's a lot of fun, and then we'll move on to what I know you were all here for, which is a cocktail recipe. Let me see what this is. Why isn't she stopped? Mason? I know this is a new computer, but
is the volume on it?
It's really, it's pretty.
Paul, why don't you read off a question for me?
Let's start us off.
We'll answer it.
Okay, question number one. Is there a specific cocktail you think is iconic of the 1950s and 1960s cocktail culture, and why?
Well, I have two different answers to that one. I think that the martini is classic for many eras. Martinis came about in the late 1800s, so it's not specifically of the 50s or the post-war era, but it's definitely iconic. I know that the post-war era, I've just been reading about this actually, Scotch, like Scotch and soda was very big then. Just these short rocks drinks with spirits and just a little bit of soda or ginger ale was very big in that period too.
Short and simple kind of things.
Exactly.
Right. We can also note that if the martini itself had nearly 75 years of history behind it, what was new on the scene in the 50s? The vodka martini.
Yes.
Heavily promoted by the Smirnoff Company, which actually started out by promoting something called the Moscow Mule, itself a little popular in that period of time, but also vodka martinis, and then eventually, of course, you get a super spy from the UK who jumps on the bandwagon, and then the movies, it's all about vodka martinis.
There are those who would tell you that vodka surpassed gin in that period for martinis. I don't think it's true, but there are those who would say so.
I think the people from the Smirnoff Research Institute might tell you that. So.
Okay, next question.
Question number two. Okay. What factors do you believe influenced the cocktail culture boom of the 1950s and 60s?
Well, for one thing, people had money, so they could go out and easily buy liquor, which was not something that was happening during the war. I mean, people were, saving, and you could get liquor during the war. Certain liquors were easier to get than others. That's why rum came back into prominence. Rum was very big in colonial times, and then it kind of fell out of favor, but you could actually get rum during the war. So I would say money, for one thing. For another thing, people were just enjoying their leisure time.
People had been through a good solid 15 years worth of either economic crisis or worldwide catastrophe, i.e. war, and of course you have various deprivations. Either you just can't get things, or you're very restricted, maybe you're feeling a little conscious that you can get things because your neighbors can't. And then you've got 5 years worth of stamps to buy gasoline. So it does become very difficult. And then suddenly it's like, well, actually, I've been saving all this money, turning your war bonds, you can buy liquor. And all liquor companies like to hop on the bandwagon. Also a simultaneous explosion in advertising, not only in print media, which magazines enjoyed a really huge boom in that period of time, but in new media, television. Suddenly you can advertise all of this stuff, liquor and cigarettes. But yeah.
Yep.
So,
Next question.
Are there any cocktails that would have been taboo during the 1950s? 1950s and 1960s, and why?
Taboo.
Taboo cocktails. That's a good question. I'm a little hard-pressed to find something that would have been verboten as much as things which may have fallen out of favor.
Right. Maybe, I don't know. I feel like I would be saying this out of ignorance, but I'm thinking maybe, I don't know, schnapps or something, like anything that was.
I don't really think so. I can't think of anything that's really off the list.
I really can't.
Everything from the
Why I
classics that
asked
we've been
that
discussing,
question.
it'd be Manhattans and martinis, no problem.
Yeah.
Your dad drank those, and he drank them the entire decade.
Right.
And tall drinks, sure, they were simple. You had your soda, you had your scotch, you had your gin, you had your tonic. And in terms of things a little more elaborate, like say your tropicals, well, the big three were well represented in the big cities across the states. You've got Vicks, you've got Don's, you've got Steve Graham's place.
He means tiki drinks.
Tiki drinks, tall things.
Tropical drink, Mai Tais, etc.
Things which probably require 5 to 10 ingredients. You may not be mixing those at home unless you're an enthusiast, but they remain popular. All of those places did.
And I think people kind of liked, if something seemed a little thrilling or naughty, I think people were all about getting hold of it.
We can even bear in mind that if we're talking verboten for political reasons, well, you might think that there was a ban on vodka. We've just been discussing how far be it from the case it was experiencing a huge surge.
Exactly, yeah.
So there you go.
So, yeah.
Okay, what are your favorite vintage cocktail appetizers?
Okay.
Yeah.
Cocktail appetizers. Well, I think a really huge one, which you actually saw on Mad Men, was the dip, the sour cream dip with the onion soup mixed in it. I think that one's very iconic of the period. I love Rumaki. I make it with water chestnuts and not chicken livers, but that one is very, very 50s.
What else is good? Well, we favor stuffed eggs and deviled
eggs. Oh my God. Yeah, I would have to say deviled eggs. I make deviled eggs all the time.
Any type. I don't know exactly the lineage, but you can certainly see those all over 50s and 60s cocktail guides, back to bar guides and cookbooks, but definitely, and any variation.
Exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely. And let's see, that
there's
Chex
also
Mix.
the peanut butter on the celery stalk with the raisins.
The raisins?
Yeah.
I never said that was raisins. But yeah, that's a popular thing.
Yep, popular for a reason.
I was just checking Chex Mix. Don't know when exactly that came in. I think that was highly popular.
Oh yeah, my grandmother made Chex Mix. Yeah, you had to make it back then. You didn't buy it.
Didn't buy it pre-made.
But yeah.
And if you make it, you can put whatever you want into it. A resurgence.
And then a lot of great cocktail bars popping up all over the country and world. So also I think the internet has a lot to do with it because people are seeing, you can go on YouTube and see things like our channel where you can see that little plug for our channel there.
You don't say.
You can see where people are making cocktails at home or building home bars, and it's not hard to do, and it's a creative thing to do. If you like to cook, you might like to make cocktails as well. So I just think people are seeing that it's not that hard, and you can save a lot of money that way. People like to throw parties. So yeah, I'm going to say the internet.
Yeah, I think that definitely fueled the growth, certainly for the past 15 to 20 years. And before that time, I'm going to actually name check the fact that everything comes in cycles. And I think you name check that as well. Mm-hmm. And that when things reach the nadir, and that's the absolute end, and all of these tropical drinks are out of favor and they're too heavy and sugary and it's just crap and nobody cares anymore. Well, then shortly thereafter, somebody will rediscover this and start finding mugs over at the local thrift store and say, wait a minute, and start digging in.
It'll start over again.
And starts digging into the old bar guides. And you have certain characters who will do a lot of research and publish books with a lot of hidden formulas and say, well, what's this? And then it starts with the professional bars. I think the Rainbow Room in New York City was one place that started with Dale DeGroff by making like very well-crafted cocktails, fresh ingredients, fresh squeezed juices, things like flaming the lemon peel into the cocktail, bringing a little showbiz back into it. And that, of course, has a lot of visual appeal. And then if people start thinking about, hey, I might be able to do that at home, then you're going to double whammy.
Yeah, I don't think it's going anywhere. I think that it went away for a while, but I think that it's not going anywhere now because too many people are doing it very well, and people are getting out there and trying great drinks and seeing that they like them. So I think it's here to stay.
Yeah. And good thing.
Yes,
And on that
exactly.
note,
Good for us.
yes. Well, thanks so much.
So thank you, Nick, for asking us to answer these questions. We really enjoyed it, and we'll see you soon.
See you soon.
Bye.
So I asked them the taboo question because I made an erroneous assumption in thinking about putting this lecture together. I assumed that people wouldn't drink vodka during the Cold War. That somehow that would be seen as this kind of like, what are you, a communist? This like McCarthyism attached to cocktails. And it turns out I was wildly incorrect about that. They mentioned this push by the Smirnoff company, so I went out there and did some research, and get this will hit home with some of you. Guess who Smirnoff used as their main proponent in their first gigantic advertising swing in the 1960s? Woody Allen. And it's worth going and just Googling Smirnoff Woody Allen ads, because they're ridiculous. But it's Woody Allen as a young guy promoting Smirnoff vodka, which was fascinating to me. I would have, not in a million years would I have ever attached him to something like that. So, I'm going to end this lecture by relying on my 25 years of experience, having been a former chef and working in the food industry on and off for the course of 25 years, one way or another. And I want to add some things to what they've said about the food and why cocktails are becoming so popular, this kind of vintage style. They're right that things are being done at home now. That's probably because it is a little bit less expensive, but I do think that there's something to be said about the excitement of I pulled that off. Like I made that happen. One of the questions I get asked all the time in relation to food is, well, where do you eat? Where do you like to go to eat? And the truth of the matter is home, because I get to be in charge. I'm a bit of a control freak in the kitchen. My wife is here today, and I'm sure that if you were willing to ask, she would attest to the fact that I do tend to be a little bit of a control freak in the kitchen. I've earned it, but I acknowledge that it is a little controlling. But I like the idea that you can do these things at home and you can kind of bend the dishes and the cocktails to your will, what you like. They are right. You should get you a solid bar book. I brought a sample of my library for home, and I'll pass this around for you guys to look at. One I highly recommend is Andy Stewart's book, The Drunken Botanist. This is fantastic, and it deals with the relationship between herbs and plants and the way that we have cultivated them for use with or to produce alcohol. This is a fantastic and very historically interesting book for people who have that inclination. The others are just good bar books to have, the best of which, in my opinion, is the Boston book. This has every cocktail you could ever imagine for all of the cocktail parties you will ever throw for the rest of your life. These are the old school cocktails, and using, for the most part, the old school recipes, the ones that were likely used by grandparents and by parents. This isn't the guy dressed in a vest at a snotty bar in Austin with dark lighting telling you that the raspberries were grown on the north side of a hill and taste slightly different. That's not these cocktails. These are just cocktails, but they're good. The proportions are correct. So I've picked some cocktails and I've picked some recipes that I think are important if you're ever inclined this way. The first, obviously, the classic vodka martini. In our home, we have vodka martinis because Nick likes gin and no one else does. So we have vodka martinis. And that's okay. It's all right. I'm willing to let that one go. I can admit, as some people in my home are willing to say often, it tastes like Christmas trees. I don't want to drink a Christmas tree. Okay, fine. I get it. Gin tastes a little bit like a Christmas tree. Tastes a little bit like a Christmas tree because gin is vodka that is flavored with juniper berries and other herbs and spices. But it's the juniper berries that makes it taste like a Christmas tree. Nevertheless, the basic vodka martini, vodka, dry vermouth, olives, or a lemon zest. There's not a lot to this one. Depending on your vermouth leanings, you will either use a substantial amount of vermouth or no vermouth. My father had an uncle who would make vodka martinis, and he'd take the vermouth bottle and like jokingly make it run past the vodka bottle, and that was all the vermouth he wanted involved in the process. Turns out that recipe is actually called the Churchill. This is how Winston Churchill drank his, dry as the Sahara. No vermouth in them at all. Stir your martinis. Don't shake them. Cocktail shakers are fun. They make a great noise, but they ruin your martinis. And the reason that they ruin your martinis is because you're taking all of that nice ice and you're beating the crap out of it and turning it into small pieces of ice which melt very quickly and alter the flavor of the vodka, the flavor of the spirit, whatever you're using. And maybe we'll look at a Manhattan, which is built very similarly. So instead, invest the like $1.50 it takes for one of those giant cocktail spoons. You can get them at Strix, I'm sure, or wherever if you buy your booze. Get the big long one. And stir methodically. You don't have to stir like a crazy person, but get it stirred up. And then strain it in to your already chilled martini glass. It needs to be chilled. Okay? But if you're working my line and you don't chill your martini glasses, you're gonna get fired because that warm martini glass is gonna ruin it immediately. Play with your olives a little bit. You can use the standard green olive with a little red guy stuck down in the middle. But you know what's even better? An olive stuffed with blue cheese. Or an olive stuffed with almonds. Or an olive stuffed with jalapenos, because Texas. Or if you want to go real Texas, a pickled okra. Put those in your martini. That'll wake you up a little bit. You've had your first cocktail and you think, maybe I should eat something. Because I made this twice as big as Dr. Nick suggested. So we're going to have some Rumaki. She talked about Rumaki, and I've had this a number of times over the course of my culinary lifetime and have either loved it or really hated it. And right now, the last one I had, I really loved. So I'm back on Rumaki. The last time I had Rumaki was when I was in New Orleans. Some friends took us to a place called Latitude 29. This is an old tiki bar done by a guy named Beach Bum Barry. We had an opportunity to briefly interact with Beach Bum Barry. He's apparently really famous in the tiki culture. By the way, I did not know that was a thing. I didn't know tiki culture is this whole thing. These friends of ours from upstate New York are wildly into tiki culture. They didn't even know it was a thing. So we go to Larry's bar and they had Rumaki, and I said, we should get this. It sounds pretty good. Their Rumaki was amazing. They took bacon and made small little cups out of it. I suspect that they used muffin tins, small mini muffin tins, to kind of crisp it up in nice cylindrical shape. In the bottom of this, they put a roasted jalapeno, just a slice enough to remind you that jalapenos are hot, but not so much that you think you're gonna die. Then they put the water chestnut on top of that, and then instead of just a piece of chicken liver, they actually made chicken liver mousse. This recipe is not the chicken liver mousse recipe, and I'll put these up on the thing so you guys can get these at your leisure. Chicken liver mousse is just chicken livers that have been cooked with onions and spices and stuff. Then you put them in a blender and you blend the snot out of them. And then you add whipped heavy cream and you fold that in gently so you end up with this light, kind of rich, oniony. It has that kind of old foul background bitterness in it. And they took that mousse and piped it now on top of the water chestnut, which is now on top of the jalapeno surrounded in bacon. And then they served it on sweetened soy sauce, and I thought I was gonna cry. They were so good. So I'm on Rumaki. So anybody that wanders through my house at some time between now and the first of the year for the holidays, you're almost certainly getting Rumaki. That's gonna happen. The Mai Tai, this is a drink that they refer to as one of the tropicals. These drinks are, a lot of these drinks were invented by Trader Vic, this man who opened these bars, who had traveled the world and had an affinity for rum. And some of Trader Vic's early recipes rely on rum that you can't get anymore. And it turns out that in the alcohol world, there is certain snobbery attached to different types of liquors and wines and beer. And oftentimes that snobbery goes with the age of the thing, right? So we talk about a 25-year scotch, right? It's super fancy. It still tastes a little bit like a bog, but it's 25 years old, so it sounds fancier. Or super old fancy wine or whatever. Well, it turns out that applies for rum, and I didn't know that either. This was a really great discovery for me. We don't get access to these rums at our local liquor store because they sell what they sell, Bacardi and all of the stuff that we're used to drinking, mixing with our Cokes or whatever sugary disgusting thing that we mix them with. But there are a variety of rums out there. This tropical is shaken. You can shake this one. This recipe calls for it to be poured over shaved ice. I don't have a shaved ice machine, so that's not happening. But I bet it's really good. The other thing that it involves is this, I think this is pronounced orgeat or orgeat. I don't know. I'm not French. I don't speak French. If anybody knows how to pronounce this, would you please raise your hand and tell us? It'd be super helpful. No?
I'm not that fluent.
Anyone? No? All right. Whatever it is, you can buy this at your local liquor store. And it is an important ingredient. I wrote down, if you bear with me, I think I wrote down what it contains.
It's orgeat.
Orgeat? All right. I can take that.
I can
Sounds right.
It's made from almond, sugar, and rose water. Almonds, sugar, and rose water. And I can imagine that the rose water and the almonds impart a particular flavor that must be central to the old Mai Tai cocktail style. I would also say this, if you're going to do a cocktail party, you want to involve a tropical like this, make it as a punch. Like make a bunch of it. Keep it in the fridge and then pour it over ice, as opposed to going through the process for each one. I think that unlike some of the other ones, this one will survive that pretty well. You could pre-make the fruit sticks. It says decorate with the spent lime shell and a fruit stick. And the fruit stick will involve any tropical that you want to stick on a stick and put in your cocktail. Thick pineapples and kiwis and strawberries I think would be appropriate for this as well. This is a fun drink. Don't be afraid to drink it in the winter just because it's cooler. I think it will remind you of warm summer breezes. French onion dip. Now look, I am the first to admit that if you need a recipe for this, maybe you shouldn't cook. I'll give you that. I read, when I was looking this up, I read that during the 1960s, Lipton Soup was absolutely convinced that more of their dried soup packages went into sour cream than into a pot for soup. That's incredible. That being said, because I'm a former chef, I'm going to let you use the package. That's just lazy. Be good with your cooking, and instead, make your own from scratch. So take some onions, about 1.5 pounds of them, and slice them as thin as you possibly can. We call this julienne. What I would do is cut the onion in half through the root, right? Leave the root on, but cut it through the root. Then cut it in half vertically, and then slice it thin, as thin as you possibly can get for 1.5 pounds or so of onions. If you have a mandolin, the thing that goes, do that. Don't mandolin your fingers. Nobody wants that in their dip. Take your onions, and now you're going to either crush or thinly slice some garlic. Put those in a pan with some olive oil and make them caramel color. Don't burn it. Go slow. Take your time. They will caramelize. You're taking those sugars and you're converting them just like we do for caramel, hence caramelized. Let those things cool. Add them to the sour cream. Add the Worcestershire. I think add the Worcestershire to taste. Add mayonnaise if you want. I don't know how I feel about this. I'm probably just going to stay sour cream. I don't know. I might try a couple versions, but that's a lot of mayo. Not for me. Salt and pepper to taste. Yeah, this one is on Mad Men. It's kind of funny to watch. And then serve it with whatever you want. And honestly, I'm saying this and I'm considering this authority. Ruffles. Ruffles have ridges.
Yeah.
Just saying. They hold the dip. My personal favorite cocktail, the Manhattan. I'm a very good friend. I'm going to send him a link to this, so shout out to Mark Davis, assuming we got this recorded. And that would be all on me and my ridiculous technology problems. Mark makes the best Manhattans I've ever had. He takes it, he claims that his are 3-to-1, but I've watched him pour them before, and I'm not convinced that he has any concept of what measurements he's actually using. He's eyeballing it, but they're still really good. He will laughingly refer to it as a Louisville if he uses an American bourbon. If he uses a Canadian whiskey, he'll refer to it as a Toronto. You know Mark Chili.
Yes.
The traditional recipe, though, sweet red vermouth, blended whiskeys. This would include your Canadians. I like R&R. It's cheap. I'm gonna tell you that right now. Comes in a plastic bottle. But for whiskey in a plastic bottle, great flavor, and it makes excellent Manhattans because it doesn't overpower the whole cocktail. Angostura bitters, and for the love of all that is holy, buy Luxardo cherries. Now look, you're gonna have to refinance your car, and that's okay because it's for a worthy cause. These things are insanely expensive, right? The little jar this big, I think we paid 18 bucks for, right at that? For this much. They're Italian, so remember, they lost the war, so they're taking it out on us in cherries. Right? No, this is the original maraschino. Not that disgustingly sweet red dyed thing that you get at Sonic floating in your limeade and think, can't wait to get to the bottom, right? Kids want it, right? No, not that cherry. The kind of cherry that my mother-in-law will eat like $4 of in one go. I love that woman with all my heart, but I have literally started to hide the Luxardo cherries from my mother-in-law because when I go to make a man, it's about 4 cherries, about $4 worth of Luxardos. I'm like, what are you doing? And she's just sitting there eating them out with a spoon. I'm like, well, all right. $18 worth of cherries right down there. So hide your maraschinos from your mother-in-law. Stir this one as well. Definitely stir this one as well. Another thing that we don't ever really talk about is the importance of quality ice, and that's a weird sentence, I admit it, right? But we don't always get quality ice in Weatherford. Does anybody want to venture a guess why? Because the water tastes like dirt. Right? Because our water source is constantly turning over, and they haven't dredged that lake since, I don't know, 19 ever. And so it kind of tastes muddy and fishy. So go buy a bag of ice and keep that in the fridge. Plus that ice is frozen differently, and you'll notice that sometimes when it gets wet, it suddenly looks see-through, but the ice cubes that come out of your fridge never do that. And that's because the the ice that's see-through has frozen differently. It's been frozen as it is constantly being filled so that it's clear. This is how they make ice to do ice sculptures, right? Finally, and I do like this cocktail. I think that this cocktail, for whatever reason, it took a turn and became, I don't know how to say this without this sounding remarkably not Me Too, but it became a chick drink, right? Men stopped drinking Tom Collinses for some reason, and I don't really understand why. This is a fantastic drink. This is a so-called tall cocktail, right? It's served in these large, tall Collins glasses. Dig around Grandma's house somewhere. She's got some of these stashed away. They may or may not have ever had liquor in them, but there's a strong probability that she got them as a wedding present or from a bank or who knows what. But you're going to want some Collins glasses for this. They can be made with either gin or vodka. I think that they are best with gin and fresh lemon juice. Take the time. Don't buy it in a plastic bottle. It's not hard to squeeze a lemon. Again, if you can't squeeze a lemon, you maybe are not the person to be making the cocktail, right? Squeeze that lemon, put the gin straight into the glass, top it off with chilled club soda. So either buy the cans and chill them, or amp up your cool factor and get you a soda maker, right? The bottle. Like in every stupid joke, in every stupid comedy movie in the 1950s and 60s, right? Somebody gets sprayed in the face with it. You can still buy those things all over the place. They're not super expensive, and you can get the charges for them at your liquor store. Because it's, I guess where you would get that. I don't know where else you can get it. Buy one of those. They're fun, and they're cheap. And you can add good water into it, not water out of the sink, which tastes like the lake. Again, the Luxardo cherry. Don't put cheap maraschinos in your good Tom Collins. Tom Collins, the debate about the name goes back to the 1800s. Suffice it to say, this is an East Coast cocktail, and is obviously a cocktail that's designed to be drank when it is hot. This is a very refreshing cocktail, and it's very dry in its flavor. It's not sickeningly sweet, particularly if you use fresh squeezed lemon juice. Questions?
I gotta go, that's fine.
Oh, that's fine. All right, the cue.
So, do you think there's a corollary to the cocktail culture, post-war 50s, 60s cocktail culture? Is there a corollary today? And what I mean by that is in our current political climate that sometimes feels like a civil Cold War, you think that the cocktail serves a similar function? Or maybe the craft beer explosion might serve a similar kind of function today?
I think that we could easily infer that the answer to that is yes. I don't know that we have all the data we need, but yeah, sure, things feel happy and stressful and sad all at the same time. We feel the anxiety of the uncertainty of our political environment. We feel the anxiety of the uncertainty of our relationship with the rest of the world, particularly as it applies to the deployment of our military. But at the same time, our pocketbooks feel a little bit better. So there are definite similarities, and it wouldn't surprise me that some of this resurgence of the cocktail thing is a mirror of what it was in the 1950s. But I don't know that we're at a point where I would say the anxieties or the successes that we were feeling in the 1950s are equally weighted to the way that we feel.
Thanks.
No problem. Thank you. Others? Nobody wants to catch a cue? Well, I appreciate you guys coming out. Remember, drink responsibly for the love of God. If you're going to drink these, stay at home. Okay? Or get an Uber. If you have questions or concerns, you got things you want to ask me and you don't want to ask right now, stay behind or send me an email. I will post this on the Facebook page so you can pull the recipes off. Drink to good health. We'll see you soon.